August 2026. Across the United States, the National Interagency Fire Center has raised the country's wildfire preparedness level to its highest possible setting, Level 5. A designation that means national firefighting resources are stretched to their limit, and states are increasingly on their own to fight fires with whatever they have left. As of this week, firefighters have responded to over 46,000 wildfires so far this year, burning more than 6.4 million acres, well above the 10-year average for both the number of fires and the total land consumed. There are currently well over 100 uncontained large fires burning simultaneously across the country. In just the past 24 hours alone, officials logged 142 new fire starts nationwide. This is what the 2026 wildfire season actually looks like right now, state by state, fire by fire, and what's driving a season already running significantly ahead of normal, with peak fire months still not fully behind us. Nowhere has this season hit harder than Washington. In the first days of August, a cluster of fires near Spokane, known collectively as the Spokane area fires, tore through local neighborhoods with almost no warning. The Old Trails Fire, the Fairview Fire, and the Autumn Lane Fire together burned close to 10,000 acres. But the real damage was measured in homes, not acreage. Officials estimate 833 structures were destroyed, a number that has actually been revised down slightly from earlier estimates of over 900 as damage assessments continue. Thousands of residents were placed under evacuation orders. Spokane County Sheriff John Knowles and local fire officials have been notably careful and honest in their public updates. In the fire's first days, they stressed that while no deaths had been confirmed, that could change once search and assessment teams could safely reach the hardest-hit neighborhoods. As those assessments have continued through the following week, officials have since cleared all outstanding missing person reports without confirming any deaths tied to the fires. Though that picture, like everything else in this video, can still be updated as recovery work continues. The scale of the response has been genuinely historic. For the first time in its department's history, California's own CAL FIRE deployed an incident management team to Washington state, an interstate mobilization officials themselves have publicly called a milestone, reflecting just how badly overstretched Washington's own firefighting capacity became during the worst days of early August. Washington's state legislature had already doubled its firefighting budget for 2026 to $120 million earlier this year, a decision that, in hindsight, looks less like caution and more like foresight. Washington's governor issued a statewide burn ban as 10 separate wildfires burned simultaneously across the state, describing conditions at one point as a particularly dangerous situation. As of the most recent update, total suppression costs for just the 3 Spokane area fires have topped $25 million, and containment, while improving, remains incomplete on some of the fires, even as evacuation orders have begun to be downgraded for the first time since the disaster began. Further east in Washington, fires like the Three Queens Fire near Cle Elum continue to burn, prompting ongoing public meetings for affected residents to get updates directly from incident command teams managing the response. Just across the border, Oregon is facing its own severe outbreak. Multiple large wildfires are actively burning across north central and eastern Oregon, spanning Gilliam, Wheeler, Wasco, Crook, Jefferson, and Umatilla counties, driven by the same pattern of hot, dry weather and gusty winds straining the entire Pacific Northwest this month. The Hay Creek Complex, formed from what were originally 2 separate fires, the Lower Rock Creek Fire and the Hogue Fire, has become one of the region's largest ongoing incidents, having burned roughly 200,000 acres before reaching full containment. Officials note that even as fires like this one get wrapped up, extremely dry conditions elsewhere in the state are still expected to drive significant fire movement in the weeks ahead. That same dry, wind-driven pattern isn't confined to Oregon. Just across the state line, a cluster of fires has forced a state of emergency in Nevada's Washoe County, near Reno. The Bug Fire and Fred Mountain Fire, which started days apart and eventually merged into a single blaze, have burned over 40,000 acres combined, while the Stallion Fire, which ignited near Pyramid Lake on August 8th, has already consumed more than 20,000 acres on its own. Evacuation orders and warnings remain active across the affected areas, as fire behavior continues to be described by officials as extremely dry conditions expected to drive significant fire movement. In Colorado, the Gold Mountain Fire in Ouray County has been burning since late June, now approaching 2 months on the ground. As of the most recent reporting, it has burned nearly 40,000 acres and is 90% contained, a positive sign after weeks of difficult firefighting in rugged terrain. Its cause remains under official investigation. Suppression costs for this single fire have already climbed past $52 million, a reminder that even a fire trending toward containment can carry an enormous price tag by the time crews are finally able to stand down. California, usually the state that dominates national wildfire headlines, is having a comparatively quieter year so far. Year-to-date figures show roughly 1,720 fires and just under 54,000 acres burned statewide, with 0 deaths reported and 13 structures destroyed, numbers dramatically lower than recent seasons. This doesn't mean California is out of danger. Fire risk remains elevated in parts of the northeast of the state, but it does mean that in 2026, the worst of the country's wildfire crisis has, so far, shifted north into Washington and Oregon, and east into Nevada instead. It's worth pausing on what this Level 5 designation genuinely represents, because it's not just a scary-sounding label. The National Multi-Agency Coordination Group, which sets these preparedness levels throughout the year, defines Level 5 specifically as the point where wildland fire activity nationally has the potential to exhaust all agency fire resources, with at least 80% of the country's incident management teams and wildland firefighting personnel already committed to active incidents. Chuck Russell, chair of the National Multi-Agency Coordination Center, explained the system simply in a recent interview, saying his team makes determinations about where to send resources based on emerging need, and that those decisions happen every single day. As he put it, fire doesn't care which state or which jurisdiction it happens to be burning in, whether the land is private, state, or federal. The coordination has to happen across all of it at once. In practice, this means requests for help move through a staged system. A local fire department that becomes overwhelmed first requests aid through one of 10 regional geographic area dispatch centers across the country. If that region can't fully meet the need, the request moves up to the National Interagency Fire Center in Boise, Idaho, which isn't actually a single standalone agency, but a coordination hub housing staff from 6 different federal and state agencies working together to track and allocate resources nationally in real time. The consequence for areas without their own active fires can be significant. Michael Johnson, a public information officer with a volunteer fire department in South Dakota, described it as a drawdown effect, where equipment and personnel from lower risk areas get pulled away and sent to the regions with the greatest active need, leaving local departments thinner than they'd otherwise be, even if their own area isn't currently burning. As of the most recent national update, nearly 30,000 firefighters are currently assigned to incidents across the country. Level 5 has only been declared a handful of times over the past decade, most recently in 2018, 2021, and 2024, And this year's declaration, which came in mid to late July, before the situation intensified further into August, reflects just how much fire activity the country is already managing, well before the season has fully run its course. Behind the raw numbers sits a specific, identifiable weather pattern. Persistent atmospheric conditions resembling La Niña have reduced precipitation and pushed temperatures higher across much of the country this year. And back in January, the National Interagency Fire Center's seasonal outlook specifically flagged above normal wildfire risk for Texas, Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas, and the broader southeastern United States, a forecast that has continued playing out as the year has progressed. For the Pacific Northwest specifically, current outlooks show no meaningful relief coming soon. Forecasters expect a continued tilt toward below normal precipitation across Oregon and Washington through at least September, with drought conditions expected to persist or worsen across both states through the end of October. Repeated, widespread rain systems capable of meaningfully dampening fire risk aren't expected until later in the fall, and even that timeline carries real uncertainty, since a similar wet weather transition was significantly delayed in 2023, something officials say cannot be ruled out again this year. Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands are also facing an unusual elevated fire risk of their own this year, with above normal significant fire potential expected to continue from August all the way through October, driven by the same broader dry pattern affecting much of the country. Even for people who live nowhere near an active fire, this season is still very likely to be felt directly through smoke. Wildfire smoke can travel enormous distances from its original source, and officials monitoring conditions in states with no fires of their own have specifically warned residents that smoke drifting in from distant blazes can degrade air quality and trigger a spike in concerned calls from people who smell smoke but can't identify a nearby source. Michael Johnson, the South Dakota fire official quoted earlier, specifically pointed residents toward airnow.gov as a reliable, real-time tool for tracking exactly how smoke from these fires, wherever they're burning, might be affecting air quality in their own area on any given day. This is also, worth noting directly, a genuine public health consideration, and not just an inconvenience. Wildfire smoke contains fine particulate matter that can affect respiratory health, even at a considerable distance from the fire itself, which is part of why air quality tracking has become as routine a part of wildfire season coverage as containment percentages and acreage figures. It's also worth noting that not every story from this fire season is about catastrophe. In Butte County, South Dakota, volunteer firefighters and neighboring departments working together managed to knock down a 220-acre grass fire before it could grow into something far larger, an outcome local officials specifically credited to quick action and effective mutual aid between departments. Officials in multiple drought-stricken states have also stressed how easily fires are starting this year, given current conditions, noting that ignition sources can be as simple as hot machinery, sparking metal, or any other non-flame heat source, not just an open flame. A detail worth keeping in mind for anyone living or working in dry, grassy areas right now. Putting this season in context helps show just how unusual its trajectory has been. In 2024, the US saw roughly 64,900 wildfires burn a combined 8.9 million acres, with 11 deaths and over 4,500 structures destroyed nationally across the full year. In 2025, the fire count rose further to nearly 78,000, though total acreage burned dropped to about 5.1 million, while the death toll rose sharply to 31 for the year. 2026 is on a different track than either of those years, with over 46,000 fires and 6.4 million acres burned as of the second week of August alone. Well before the season has fully concluded, this year is already tracking at 126% of the 10-year average for total fire count, and a striking 156% of the 10-year average for total acreage burned. Whether the final year-end numbers ultimately exceed 2024 or 2025's full season totals will depend heavily on how the remaining weeks of peak season and the slower burning months that follow actually play out. But the current pace alone marks 2026 as a significantly above average year by any standard measure being tracked. Underlying nearly every fire mentioned in this video is the same root cause, an atmospheric pattern resembling La Niña that has suppressed rainfall and elevated temperatures across large parts of the country this year. This isn't a phenomenon confined to any single state or region. It's part of why the National Interagency Fire Center's seasonal outlook, issued all the way back in January, was already flagging elevated risk for states as geographically separate as Texas, Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, months before Washington, Oregon, and Nevada became the season's most active flashpoints. Drought conditions don't develop overnight, and a pattern identified in a January forecast playing out with this much accuracy by August is itself a reminder that these seasonal outlooks, however far in advance they're issued, are grounded in real, trackable atmospheric science, rather than guesswork. Beyond the human and structural toll, this season is also proving extraordinarily expensive to fight. The Gold Mountain Fire in Colorado alone has cost more than $52 million in suppression efforts as of its most recent update, for a single fire that, while large, is far from the biggest incident burning nationally this year. The 3 Spokane area fires in Washington have together cost over $25 million in suppression, a figure that continues climbing even as containment improves. Multiply figures like these across the more than 100 large, uncontained fires currently burning nationwide, and it becomes clear why national resource allocation, the entire point of the preparedness level system described earlier in this video, matters so much practically, not just symbolically. Every dollar and every crew sent to one fire is a dollar and a crew that isn't available for the next one that breaks out. Canada is facing its own active fire season simultaneously this year, with wildfires burning across Alberta, British Columbia, and several other provinces since early in the year. While that's a separate country's fire response, and outside the scope of this video's focus on the United States, it's directly relevant to the smoke and air quality picture discussed earlier, since Canadian wildfire smoke has, in recent years, repeatedly drifted south across the border and affected air quality in American cities thousands of miles from any Canadian fire itself. A reminder that wildfire impact, unlike wildfire jurisdiction, genuinely doesn't respect a map's borders. For anyone currently living in or near any of the regions mentioned in this video, a few practical points are worth repeating clearly. Evacuation orders, when issued, are issued for a specific reason, based on fire behavior modeling and real-time conditions that local officials are tracking far more closely than any outside source can. If your area is placed under an evacuation order or warning, treat it as time-sensitive rather than optional, since fire behavior in dry, wind-driven conditions, like the ones described throughout this video, can change dramatically within a very short window. If you're outside a fire zone but experiencing smoke, checking airnow.gov before spending extended time outdoors, particularly for children, older adults, and anyone with existing respiratory conditions, is a simple, genuinely useful step grounded directly in official guidance from the fire officials interviewed for the reporting this video draws from. With the national preparedness level sitting at its maximum setting, firefighting resources nationwide are already heavily committed, meaning any new large fire that breaks out now, in any state, is starting from a position where help may be slower to arrive, simply because so much of the country's firefighting capacity is already deployed elsewhere. That's part of what makes moments like CAL FIRE's unprecedented deployment to Washington so significant. It reflects a national system genuinely being tested by the volume and simultaneity of this year's fire activity, not just any single catastrophic blaze. For anyone in an active fire zone, or anywhere fire risk is currently elevated, official, continuously updated information matters more than anything in a video like this one ever could. The National Interagency Fire Center, INCIWEB, and your state's own emergency management and fire agency websites are updated far more frequently than any single piece of content can be, and are the right place to check for the latest evacuation orders, containment percentages, and air quality information for your specific area. This wildfire season isn't over, and given how far ahead of normal it's already running, with peak fire months still not fully behind the country, it's very likely the numbers in this video will already be outdated by the time you're watching it. Containment percentages that show 90% today might show 100% or a setback by next week. Structure counts in Washington may be revised again as assessment teams reach areas that remain difficult to access. New large fires, statistically, are almost certain to have started somewhere in the country since this video was recorded, simply given how many are already igniting on a daily basis nationwide. That's not a flaw in the reporting. It's simply the nature of covering a disaster while it's still actively unfolding, rather than looking back at one from a safe historical distance. What can be said with confidence, based on the pattern already established through the first 2/3 of this year's fire season, is that the underlying conditions driving it, the drought, the reduced precipitation, the atmospheric pattern behind it all, aren't expected to meaningfully change in the coming weeks. Whatever specific fires are burning by the time you're watching this, the broader picture behind them is very likely to look much the same.